My name is Rachel Anderson. I'm 32 years old, and just last month, my whole family decided that I wasn't worth keeping around. It started with a single group message. My parents, Thomas and Linda, wrote, "We think it's best you step away for now." No warning, no phone call, just those words in a chat box. A few seconds later, my Aunt Margaret reacted to the message with a thumbs-up emoji. Like my being pushed out of the family wasn't a serious thing, just a casual update. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling my stomach twist. Finally, I typed back, "Understood. I'll respect that and step away from the family fund too." Then I set my phone down and walked straight to my laptop. That night, I logged into our shared accounts and closed my contribution. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because they told me to step away on. I always take words seriously. At 2:15 in the morning, my phone began buzzing on my nightstand. I rolled over half asleep and saw the notifications piling up. By the time the sun came up, I had 18 missed calls. My father had left several voicemails, his voice switching from sharp anger to full-on panic. The bank had flagged the account. Everything was frozen, but I didn't pick up. Instead, I texted back a simple line, "I'm honoring your decision." That was before they realized the bigger picture, before they realized just how much I actually had outside of the family business. Now, before I go too far, let me back up, because you need to understand who the Andersons were. We weren't just some regular family from Boston. We were the Andersons, name that carried real weight in financial circles all across New England. The family business, Anderson Wealth Advisors, had been running for 3 generations. My grandfather, George Anderson, started it from scratch right after World War II. Back then, it was just a small operation helping neighbors manage savings and bonds. But over the decades, it grew into one of the most respected advisory firms. In the region, I grew up watching my father, Thomas, expand what my grandfather built. He turned it into a full-scale empire. We lived in a big 5-bedroom colonial in Brookline. The walls were covered in expensive paintings and family portraits, shelves stacked with trophies, and the living room filled with imported furniture. There were pictures of my parents standing with senators, governors, even celebrities. My mother, Linda, was the perfect high-society wife. She hosted lavish dinner parties where million-dollar deals were sealed over her famous pecan pie. She dressed in designer outfits, made sure the house looked like a magazine cover, and kept up appearances at every charity gala. As for me, from an early age, I showed a natural gift for numbers. While my cousins played with dolls and trucks, I sat at the table flipping through the stock reports my father left lying around. I wasn't even 10 when I started asking him about market trends, sometimes questions he couldn't fully answer. It wasn't that I was trying to outsmart him, it was just how my brain worked. But it created a kind of tension between us, one that would grow stronger as I got older. When I was accepted into Wharton and later graduated at the top of my class, with a double major in finance and economics, I thought I had proven myself. But in my family's eyes, I was still the little girl who needed guidance. When I came back home at 24 and joined Anderson Wealth Advisors, I was ready to give my best. But instead of being trusted with responsibility, my father placed me under the wing of my cousin, Eric. Eric had barely scraped through his business degree at a state college. Yet my father told me, "You need to understand how we do things. In the real world, Eric's been here longer." The truth? Eric had been there 7 months longer. That was it. But I nodded and played along, because that's what you do in my family. The funny part is, over the next 8 years, I quietly became the firm's most valuable player. My strategies consistently outperformed market averages by 7 to 9%, while the industry was celebrating just 2% gains. Clients started asking for me by name, though in board meetings, my father often took the credit for my team's success. I didn't complain, I just kept working. Meanwhile, there was something else. The Anderson Family Fund. It wasn't the same as the business. It was a $12 million pool that family members contributed to. dipping into it whenever they needed money for new ventures, vacation homes, or whatever else they wanted. My own contribution alone had grown to $4.2 million, nearly 35% of the total. That's right, I held the largest stake of anyone. What nobody knew, though, was that I had been building a separate investment portfolio since college. While my relatives spent summers in the Hamptons, I was meeting with startup founders. While they drove luxury cars, I was buying minority stakes in new tech companies. I wasn't showing off. I was just thinking long term. Last Thanksgiving, my Uncle Stephen raised a glass and made a toast about how, in our family, we all pull our weight and share the rewards equally. Everyone cheered, even though that quarter, my division had been responsible for 62% of the company's profits. I smiled, raised my glass too, and quietly told myself, it's time to speed up my exit plan. Every month, we held family meetings in the downtown Boston office, in a big mahogany-paneled room that smelled like old money. I would come in with charts, data, detailed reports, and clear growth projections. And almost without fail, my Uncle Richard would interrupt me halfway through. That's all very technical, he'd say, waving a hand. But what does your father think? It was like being invisible. After those meetings, my mother would often pull me aside with her gentle but suffocating advice. Sweetheart, men don't like women who sound too smart. You need to let your father and uncles feel important. And then there was Aunt Margaret, the same aunt who gave the thumbs up when I was kicked out. She never worked a single day in the business, yet she sat on the board and got the same share of profits as the rest of us who were working 60 hours a week. She had a gift for stealing credit, especially mine. Once, 3 weeks after I presented a plan to expand into Europe, she stood up in a meeting and said, I've been thinking we should consider Europe. People nodded like it was her idea. The only one who ever seemed to really get me was my cousin Samantha. Over lunch one day, she sighed and told me, they do the same thing to me, except worse, because I don't have your financial skills. They just want me to marry someone who benefits the business. Even with all this, I stayed loyal. I told myself that eventually, hard work would pay off and I'd finally be respected. But quietly, I kept building my safety net. By my 32nd birthday, my personal investments had grown to $17 million. I didn't tell anyone, not even Samantha. I bought a beautiful brownstone in Back Bay under an LLC, renovated the office with state-of-the-art equipment, and hired a small, loyal team who worked only for me, bound by strict NDAs. I even secured patents for financial algorithms I'd been designing in my spare time. But outwardly, I lived modestly. I drove an average car, didn't flaunt wealth, and kept showing up at Anderson Wealth every morning, making money for people who didn't value me. Some would call it patience. Others might call it avoiding conflict. Either way, I kept it up, until the day everything cracked. It happened at one of our quarterly planning meetings. My father sat at the head of the table, as always, and I had prepared a new investment strategy that could raise our high-net-worth clients' returns by 12%. I had binders, charts, everything laid out perfectly. Eric, of course, strolled. And 15 minutes late, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. Sorry I'm late, he said casually. I was finishing up with the Donovan account. The Donovan account was actually mine. I'd only asked him to sit in on one call. But my father lit up, proud. Good job, son, client relationships. Come first. Why don't you tell us how it's going? So, for 20 minutes, Eric took credit for 6 months of my work. I sat there, quiet, watching everyone nod approvingly. When it was finally my turn, I had just gotten through the second slide before Uncle Richard cut me off. This seems too complicated. Our clients trust the Anderson name because we keep it simple, Aunt Margaret quickly chimed in. Exactly. These algorithms just confuse people, I tried to explain calmly. Actually, our clients' surveys show they want more advanced strategies. If we don't adapt, we'll start losing accounts. But my father tapped his pen, his sign that he was impatient. Rachel's theories are one thing, but we deal in practical realities here. This isn't theory, I said, trying to stay steady. I already tested this with the Westfield account. They saw a 14% return in just 1 quarter. The room went silent. My father narrowed his eyes. You implemented this without authorization. I talked to you about it last month. You said to do whatever I thought best since it was underperforming. I certainly didn't authorize a complete strategy overhaul, he snapped. He knew he hadn't listened. He'd been too busy watching a golf match on the office TV that day. Eric jumped in again with nothing prepared. Just repeating old ideas. I had already presented the year before, and yet the family praised him like he was a genius. My father even said, "Now that's the kind of thinking our clients expect." That was the moment I realized something had to change. After that meeting, I couldn't shake the frustration boiling inside me. I decided to speak with my father privately, hoping maybe face-to-face he would finally listen. I walked into his office, closing the door behind me. "Dad," I started. "Carefully, I'm worried about the direction we're going. Eric's planet has huge gaps. It could leave our clients exposed to unnecessary risks." He barely looked up from his phone, scrolling through sports scores like I wasn't even in the room. "Rachel, you're too caught up in the details. This business was built on instinct, on relationships, not just numbers and charts." I tried to stay calm. But the numbers and charts are what keep us compliant with regulations, and they're what actually grow client wealth. He finally glanced up at me, annoyed. "You know what your problem is? You've never trusted the family way of doing things. Always thinking that fancy degree of yours makes you smarter than everyone else." His words hit harder than I expected. I'd given almost a decade of my life to this company. I'd doubled its value, managed over $300 million in assets, and still, I was treated like a kid who didn't understand the real world. "That's not true," I said quietly. "I've dedicated my entire career to this business." "We appreciate that, sweetheart," he replied, in the same patronizing tone I'd heard my whole life, "but you're still learning." I walked out of his office in silence, my chest tight. As I passed the break room, I overheard Margaret and Uncle Richard. "Rachel's presentations give me a headache," Aunt Margaret complained. "All those charts and big words, like she's trying to make the rest of us feel stupid. Thomas needs to rein her in." "She doesn't understand our culture," Uncle Richard agreed. "She never has." I froze, standing there with their words echoing in my head. For years, I had ignored the comments, brushed them off, told myself it didn't matter. But now, something inside me snapped. That night, instead of joining my family for dinner, I went home to my brownstone. I sat in my office, staring at my computer screen, but not really seeing it. For the first time, I let myself accept what I had always known deep down. No matter what I did, I would never be respected in my family's business. So I started preparing. I reviewed every detail of my personal affairs. I made sure all my independent ventures were separated from the family accounts. I checked that the patents and intellectual property were under my name alone. I confirmed which client relationships were tied directly to me through contracts. I wasn't planning to make a move that night. But I knew sooner or later I'd need to be ready. The following week only confirmed my decision. During a client meeting, my father interrupted me mid-explanation, saying, "Let me translate that to English." He oversimplified my strategy, to the point of being completely inaccurate, and the client looked confused at a training session. Eric presented one of my models, something I had spent weeks perfecting as if he had created it himself. Then came an email chain about an important planning retreat. Somehow, I had been left off. Accidentally, they said. But I knew better. The final straw came one Tuesday morning. I arrived at the office early, ready to meet with our biggest client, but when I walked through the glass doors, I froze. The meeting had already started. Through the glass walls, I saw my father, Eric, and a few others sitting with the clients I had worked with for years. They were using my slides, my research, my work without me. As the clients nodded approvingly, my father and Eric exchanged proud smiles. It was like I didn't exist. Later that day, I found out about the retreat. The family leadership team was gathering at my uncle's lake house for a weekend of strategic planning. Everyone was invited except me. That night, I sat alone in my office at home. Years of memories crashed over me. Every time my ideas were dismissed, only to be praised when someone else repeated them. Every late night, every early morning, every piece of myself I had poured into building their wealth. Enough, I whispered to the empty room. 3 days later, the group message came. The one that changed everything, at 4 p.m. on a Friday. A notification popped up from the Anderson family WhatsApp group. It was my father. After careful discussion, we think it's best if Rachel steps away from client management for now. We appreciate her background work, but clients respond better to our traditional approach. This isn't permanent. It's just a chance to realign with the Anderson way of doing things. My stomach turned as the responses started rolling in. Uncle Richard, completely agree. Smart move. Aunt Margaret, endorsed. Eric, happy to take over her accounts during the transition. My mother, we only want what's best for everyone. 2 of my cousins chimed in too, all supporting the decision. Not one person questioned it. Not one asked for my side. I waited 17 minutes before replying. Then I typed, understood. I'll respect that decision and step away from the family fund too. Wishing everyone continued success. It looked polite, professional. But it was also a bombshell, because the Anderson family fund wasn't just a side pool of money. It was the safety net that made their whole empire run smoothly. And my contribution over $4 million was holding up a third of it. I placed my phone down, turned the volume off, and opened my laptop. As one of the fund administrators, I had full access. With a few clicks, I withdrew my entire contribution for $0.2 million plus the additional $1.7 million growth that came directly from my investments. The system asked, "Are you sure?" I clicked yes. Then I emailed the family attorney, documenting my withdrawal under the terms of our agreement. Everything was legal. Everything was clean. The fund required 50% liquidity, so my withdrawal didn't bounce. But it did shake the foundation of the whole structure. Within minutes, automatic bank alerts were firing off to every administrator. While my family was out enjoying their Friday evening, I sat in my quiet brownstone, sipping tea, watching the Boston skyline, and feeling something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just felt lighter. By 7:30 that evening, my phone started buzzing with messages and missed calls. I ignored them. Instead, I ordered takeout, turned on a movie, and let myself enjoy a peaceful night. At 10:47 p.m., my father called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. By the 4th call, I powered off my phone completely. When I turned it back on at 7 o'clock, the next morning, it went wild. 64 missed calls. 127 texts, 43 WhatsApp messages, 17 voicemails. The first voicemail was sharp. "Rachel, it's Dad. Call me immediately. There must be some mistake." The second was angrier. "This is completely unacceptable. Whatever point you're trying to make, this isn't the way. Call me back." By 2:15 a.m., his voice had shifted. He sounded desperate. "Rachel, what happened? The bank has flagged everything. The fund is completely frozen. You need to call me right now." The last voicemail, at 6:30 a.m., was different. Quieter. "Rachel, I don't understand what's happening. Whatever we did to upset you, this seems extreme. The bank says you're the only one who can unfreeze the accounts. Please, call me back." I finished my coffee, showered, and put on my favorite navy blue suit. It had always made me feel strong. Only then did I send him a text. "I'm honoring your decision. You asked me to step away, and I have. I've withdrawn my contribution. under Section 7.3 of the agreement. The freeze is standard procedure. It will resolve after verification. I've already submitted my documentation. Seconds later, the phone rang. I declined. Then I sent one more text. I'll be available to discuss this Monday at 9 a.m. at MY Home Office. The address has been emailed. I silenced notifications again. Across town, my family was losing their minds. But me. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the calm wash over me. For the first time, I wasn't chasing their approval. And this was just the beginning. By Saturday afternoon, I already knew my family was in chaos. What they didn't know was that I had a friend on the inside. Not in any shady way, but just an old college connection. Sandra Lee, one of my classmates from Wharton, now worked as a senior manager at the bank that handled the Anderson family fund. Sandra couldn't share anything confidential, of course, but she gave me a call that afternoon, her voice carrying a mix of amusement and sympathy. "Your family is creating quite a scene," she said with a little laugh. "Your dad has been on the phone with 3 different departments all morning. Your uncle even showed up in person demanding to talk to the president of the bank." I sighed. "I'm sorry for the drama." "Don't be," Sandra replied. "From what I can see, everything you did was completely by the book. The freeze is standard protocol when someone suddenly withdraws such a big chunk of a fund. It's just an anti-fraud measure." "I know," I said. "I already submitted my documents, so it should be cleared by Monday." "Exactly. But I doubt that'll calm them down in the meantime," she added. And she was right. Even though I had muted most notifications, my phone still lit up with previews every so often. Little snippets of my family's panic. "Uncle Richard, this is sabotage. She can't just do this. Aunt Margaret, I always said she was too emotional for leadership. Eric, what about the Henderson deal? We're counting on it. My mother, Rachel, honey, please talk to us. We can fix this." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. By Saturday evening, their tone had started to change. The outrage was fading, replaced by something new: desperation. That Henderson deal Eric mentioned. It was a $20 million commercial real estate investment they'd been working on for months. My family had been planning to use the fund for the down payment. Without my share, they were millions short, and with the freeze in place, they couldn't even access what remained. 6 months of planning and a potential $3 million profit were slipping through their fingers. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling. Among all the messages, one stood out: my cousin Samantha, the only person in the family who had ever shown me genuine kindness, texted, "Good for you. They never appreciated you. Coffee next week." I smiled at that one. I typed back a simple yes. That night, though, the chaos escalated again. The calls and texts weren't just coming from family anymore. Clients had started to hear rumors, and they were worried. Some of them had my personal number thanks to my father, who apparently gave it out to reassure them. That was a line crossed. He was dragging outside clients into an internal fight. For 2 hours, I sat at my desk, carefully replying to every client who reached out. I reassured them their accounts were completely safe, because they were. The family fund was separate from client portfolios, and their money wasn't affected. I kept it professional, calm, and polite. I didn't badmouth the family. I didn't let any of my frustration leak through. These relationships had taken years to build, and I wasn't about to let my family's meltdown damage my reputation. Around midnight, the calls shifted again. This time, it was Jonathan Myers, our longtime family attorney. Unlike everyone else, Jonathan wasn't yelling. His voice was calm, steady, professional. "Rachel, I've reviewed your withdrawal paperwork," he said. "Everything looks clean and legal. But you need to understand the timing and manner of this action have created significant challenges for the family operations." "I do understand," I replied. "But I acted within my rights, as you just confirmed." He paused for a moment, before continuing. Your father has asked me to reach out with an offer. If you restore the funds immediately, they're prepared to renegotiate your leadership role at the company. I leaned back in my chair, letting his words sink in. For years, I'd been begging for recognition. Now, after one decisive move, they were suddenly willing to talk. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I'm not making any decisions right now. I'll discuss everything Monday morning as planned. Jonathan hesitated. Your father also mentioned the possibility of legal action regarding intellectual property and client relationships. I almost laughed. That was a weak threat, and Jonathan knew it. My patents were registered in my name. The algorithms I'd built were mine, created on my own time with my own resources, and many of my client contracts had personal service clauses that tied them to me directly, not to the firm. I'm sure you've already reviewed those documents, Jonathan, I said. You know the contracts are airtight. He sighed. I'll relay your position. For what it's worth, I've advised against any legal posturing. It wouldn't serve anyone's interests. I agree, I said softly. Good night, Jonathan. By Sunday morning, their tactics shifted again. This time, they leaned on emotions. My mother left a tearful voicemail, her voice cracking as she talked about family loyalty and how my grandfather would be disappointed in me. Aunt Margaret sent a long message about how she had always admired my business skills and that we, as women in finance, needed to support each other. I almost rolled my eyes. Uncle Richard tried a different angle. You're overreacting. This is just a standard restructuring. Don't let your feelings ruin everything. They were all scrambling, each trying a different way to reel me back in. But none of it worked. I had already made up my mind. That evening, I sat in my office, organizing everything for Monday's meeting. I printed contracts, highlighted key clauses, prepared talking points. I wasn't going in for revenge. I wasn't interested in destroying them. I simply wanted respect, recognition, and control over my own value. Later that night, my security camera alerted me. Someone was at my front door. When I checked the feed, I saw my father standing there, and for the first time in my life, he looked small. His usually perfect shirt was wrinkled. His face was tired, older. I debated not answering, but something in his posture stopped me. I opened the door, but I didn't invite him inside. Rachel, he said quietly, the Henderson deal falls through tomorrow at 9 a.m. if we don't have the funds. That's $3 million down the drain. I looked him straight in the eye. That sounds like a business problem. You'll need a business solution. What does that mean? He asked, almost pleading. It means I'll see you tomorrow. At 9 a.m. at my home office. Bring whoever you want from the leadership team. He hesitated, clearly wanting me to cave right there, but I didn't budge. 9 a.m., he finally said, before turning and walking back to his car. When I closed the door, I leaned against it, breathing deeply. For the first time, he had come to me in need, instead of the other way around. Tomorrow wouldn't just be another family meeting. Tomorrow, for the first time, I'd be the one setting the terms. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept waking up, checking the security system, half expecting another surprise visit. But the house stayed quiet. By 6 a.m., I was up, moving with purpose. I set up my dining room as a conference space. Each seat had copies of the documents I had prepared. I brewed coffee, laid out a tray of pastries, little details that made the atmosphere professional at 8:30. The camera alert pinged. They were early. Through the feed, I saw them. My father, Uncle Richard, Aunt Margaret, Eric, and Jonathan the attorney. The full leadership team, good. I was ready for all of them at exactly 8:59 a.m. on Monday. I opened the front door of my brownstone. My father stood there at the front of the group, with Uncle Richard, Aunt Margaret, my cousin Eric, and our family lawyer Jonathan lined up behind him like some kind of army. Their faces told me everything. My father looked tense. Richard looked angry. Margaret tried to wear her usual fake warmth. Eric had his usual smugness, and Jonathan looked like he just wanted to keep things calm. "Come in," I said simply, stepping aside. As they filed in, I caught the way their eyes darted around my home. None of them had ever been inside before. They noticed the artwork, the polished wood floors, the elegant but understated furnishings. I could see the flicker of surprise, maybe even unease on their faces. They had always pictured me as the daughter who drove a modest car and lived quietly. They hadn't realized how much I had built outside of them. "The dining room is set up," I said, leading them through the hall. They followed, and when they entered the room, they froze for a split second. The table was arranged like a professional boardroom. Each seat had neatly stacked documents, pens, and a fresh cup of coffee waiting. I stayed standing at the head of the table, the spot my father usually claimed in family meetings. He noticed. I could tell, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he sat down to my right. The others took their places, murmuring thanks when I offered coffee. For a moment, the room was quiet. The tension was thick, everyone waiting for someone else to speak. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Rachel, we're here to resolve this situation quickly." "The Henderson deal." I lifted my hand, cutting him off. The gesture was one he had used on me countless times, but now it was mine. "Before we talk about any specific deal, we need to address the bigger issue," I said evenly. "I've withdrawn my contribution from the family fund. It was my right under the agreement. The bank has confirmed the transaction is proper, and the freeze will be lifted by noon today." "This is ridiculous," Uncle Richard exploded. "You're holding the family hostage over what, a bruised ego? Because we suggested you take a different role." I turned to him, keeping my tone calm. "This isn't about ego, Uncle Richard. This is about value and respect. For 8 years, I've delivered returns above the market average. My division brought in 62% of profits last quarter. My clients rate me the highest in satisfaction across the firm. And how is that recognized? With the group text telling me to step away." Aunt Margaret leaned forward, putting on her sugary voice. "Sweetheart, we just wanted to communicate the decision quickly. The retreat was where we planned to discuss it in detail." "The retreat I wasn't invited to," I pointed out. "That was an oversight," my father said quickly. Eric smirked. "Come on, Rachel. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. You got your feelings hurt, and now you're blowing up a major deal over it." I turned my eyes on him. "I didn't blow up anything. I simply withdrew my own contribution. The fact that it made such a huge dent reveals the real problem here. You've all been taking my investment and my work for granted." My father leaned forward, his jaw tight. "Whatever mistakes were made, and I'll admit there may have been some, your reaction is out of proportion. You've put a $3 million deal at risk. A deal I wasn't consulted on," I reminded him. "And apparently a deal that couldn't happen without my money." Jonathan, the attorney, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should focus on immediate solutions first. The Henderson deadline is the most time-sensitive matter." I nodded. "Fair enough. I'm prepared to wire $5 million this morning. That will cover the down payment with room to spare." For a moment, the room buzzed with relief until I raised my hand again. "But this will not be a contribution. It will be a loan, from my personal holdings to the family fund. Standard market interest rates, clear repayment terms. Jonathan can draft the paperwork." My father blinked, stunned. "You're going to charge your own family interest?" "This is a business transaction," I replied calmly. "And for years, you've told me that family comes second to business when it comes to Anderson wealth. I'm offering favorable terms on extremely short notice. Any other lender would charge much more." Jonathan nodded reluctantly. "She's right. Under the circumstances, it's a reasonable offer." "This is extortion," Uncle Richard spat. "No," I said evenly. "This is negotiation. You can accept, or you can let the deal collapse." The room went silent. I could see my father's mind racing, pride battling against practicality. Finally, he exhaled. "Fine." Jonathan, draft the agreement. Then he looked at me. But Rachel, after this, we expect you to reinvest in the family fund and return to your role in the company. We'll discuss a more appropriate leadership position for you. I shook my head. That's not on the table today. The loan is one issue. My future with Anderson Wealth is another. And that will require a new agreement entirely. Aunt Margaret leaned closer, trying her fake sympathy again. Rachel, dear, I understand you're upset. We all say things in the heat of the moment, but we're family. Yes, we are, I agreed. And family should treat each other with respect. A group text asking me to step aside didn't exactly show that. That was poorly handled, my father admitted. I'll take responsibility for that. But surely we can move past one mistake. It wasn't one mistake, I said quietly. It was years of dismissals. Years of my ideas being ignored until someone else repeated them. Years of my achievements being attributed to the team while others were celebrated. I've made millions for this family, and I've been treated like an afterthought. That ends today. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time, I wasn't smoothing things over. I wasn't accepting their excuses. Eric broke the quiet with a laugh. Let's be realistic. You need the Anderson name and our connections. Just as much as we need your number crunching. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? I couldn't help but smile. That was the opening I had been waiting for. That brings me to the next item, I said, picking up a small remote. I pressed the button, and the television on the wall flicked on. A presentation appeared with a bold logo, Anderson Capital Management. I advanced the slide, showing charts of strong growth. For the past 4 years, I've been running my own firm. Quietly, independently. My clients have enjoyed average returns of 17%, compared to the 9% here at Anderson Wealth. Their faces were a mix of shock and disbelief. That's not possible, my father muttered. You've been working full-time with us. When would you have time to run another business? Evenings, weekends, the vacation days I never took, I answered. While you were at the lake house, I was building this. Uncle Richard's face turned red. That's a violation of your contract. Competing with the family business. I slid a document across the table to Jonathan. My contract specifically allows for personal investment activities as long as I don't directly solicit Anderson clients. And I haven't. Jonathan, please confirm. Jonathan scanned it quickly, then nodded. She's correct. The language is broad. It doesn't forbid this. I advanced the slide again, showing a list of patents. I also hold 7 patents for financial algorithms and trading systems, all legally registered under my name, developed with my own resources, on my own time. My father shook his head. But you created those while working for us. I created them on my weekends. I have detailed documentation. They're mine. Another slide, a client list. 27 high net worth individuals whose accounts were managed entirely by me, separate from the family. Their combined assets totaled over 400 million. Eric let out a low whistle despite himself. And here's something else, I said, handing out contracts. 17 of Anderson Wealth's existing clients have personal service agreements with me. These agreements state that if I leave, they have the option to transfer their accounts to follow me. Jonathan flipped through the papers, his expression darkening. These are standard service clauses. Clients often insist on them. They're legally binding. How much? My father asked quietly. About 230 million in assets, I answered. The room fell completely silent. For once, they were speechless. I didn't build this to hurt you, I said, my tone softening slightly. I built it to protect myself. Because I knew I'd never truly be respected here. This was survival, not sabotage. Then I clicked to the final slide, a comparison of Anderson Wealth's results versus Anderson Capital's. The difference was clear. My firm outperformed theirs by a wide margin. I looked around the table. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for recognition. I've earned it. For the first time in my career, I saw something in my father's eyes that had never been there before, respect, mixed with regret. What do you want, Rachel? He asked quietly. All right, here comes part 5. This section dives into Rachel's terms for the family, the formal loan for the Henderson deal, and the shocking power shift as the family realizes she holds more leverage than they imagined. Written in basic U.S. English, natural voiceover style. Around 1,800 words, with all names changed but keeping the meaning intact. When my father asked me that question, "What do you want, Rachel?" the room seemed to hold its breath. For years, I had been waiting to hear those words. I didn't rush. I placed my hands on the table, looked each of them in the eye, and spoke slowly. First, I said, we finalized the loan for the Henderson deal. That's the immediate problem. I'm prepared to wire $5 million today, but only under clear loan terms. Drafted by Jonathan, with interest and repayment schedules included. They nodded reluctantly, already knowing they didn't have another option. Second, I continued, I take a 1-month leave of absence from Anderson Wealth. During that time, you can consider how this business will operate going forward. I'm not going to continue under the same conditions. I let that settle before I delivered the final piece. Third, after 30 days, we reconvene. At that meeting, I expect one of two things. Either a new agreement with clear authority and respect for my role, or a clean separation where I take my clients with me. I paused. Those are my non-negotiable terms. For a long moment, no one spoke. My Uncle Richard looked like he was about to explode. Aunt Margaret was shifting uncomfortably, trying to read the room. Eric tapped his fingers against the table, clearly angry but unsure what to say. Jonathan, the lawyer, finally broke the silence. From a legal standpoint, her terms are reasonable. Given the circumstances, I would advise accepting them. Richard slammed his hand on the table. She's blackmailing us. We can't let her hold the family hostage. But my father raised his hand, silencing him, the same gesture he had used to cut me off in countless meetings. Only this time, it wasn't directed at me. We accept, he said quietly. Jonathan, draw up the loan documents immediately, and draft her leave of absence. Eric leaned forward, scowling. You can't be serious. She's undermining the whole family business. Enough, Eric, my father snapped. His voice had an edge I hadn't heard in years. The situation has changed. We need to adapt. Jonathan opened his laptop and began typing. The room fell into an uneasy quiet. I watched them carefully, taking in the way their faces shifted. For years, they had dismissed me, minimized me, treated me as though my contributions were secondary. Now, they were realizing I wasn't just an asset, they were dependent on me. Aunt Margaret was the first to try changing tactics. She leaned forward, her voice coated in false warmth. Rachel, I've always said you were the brightest financial mind in the family.
We should have
Given you more recognition sooner. I look forward to seeing what role you'll take after your leave. Her insincerity was almost laughable, but I didn't let it show. I simply nodded politely. Within an hour, the documents were ready. I signed the loan agreement, transferring the $5 million into the family fund immediately. The Henderson deal was saved, and I could feel the relief ripple around the table, even as resentment lingered in their eyes as they gathered their things. My father lingered behind while the others filed out. He looked around my home again, really looking this time. The art, the furniture, the quiet proof of my success. I underestimated you, he said finally. I've been doing it your entire life, haven't I? I didn't answer right away. My silence was enough. The family meeting in 30 days will be a chance for a fresh start, he added. One way or another. I nodded. That's the idea. He gave me a tired smile. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you even if I haven't shown it. Thank you, I said softly. But I needed to hear that years ago, not after. You were forced into it. He nodded again, his eyes heavy with regret, and left. When the door closed behind him, I sank into a chair at the head of the table. Coffee cups were still scattered around, papers left behind, the room thick with the aftertaste of tension. For years, I had imagined standing up to them, demanding respect. Now that it had finally happened, it felt both surreal and deeply satisfying. But I wasn't naive. I knew one meeting didn't erase decades of habits. The next 30 days would be critical for them and for me. The month passed faster than I expected. During my leave, I focused on my independent firm, Anderson Capital. My small team and I ran through every scenario. What if I merged with a family under new terms? What if I went fully independent? What if clients started shifting en masse? We prepared for everything. Systems were updated, contracts reviewed, strategies polished. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I didn't have to beg for approval, where I ran things my way. But it wasn't all business. I also took time for myself, hiking in the White Mountains, having dinners with non-family friends, even dipping my toes back into dating. A lightness settled over me that I hadn't felt in years. Samantha and I met for coffee several times. Away from the toxic family environment, she opened up more. She told me about her degree in architecture, something the family had never supported. They pushed me into marketing because they thought it would help the business, she said. Bitterly, she hesitated before adding, but seeing you stand up to them gave me courage. I've started interviewing with design firms. I haven't told anyone else. I smiled. They'll try to talk you out of it. I know, she said. But I've seen now what's possible. Her words stuck with me. Maybe my stand wasn't just about me. Maybe it was about changing the dynamic for the next generation too. Jonathan gave me occasional updates during the month. The Henderson deal had gone through successfully. My father had even implemented some of the strategies I'd been proposing for years, and the early results were strong. It was clear they were starting to realize just how much they had relied on me. And slowly, messages began trickling in through Jonathan, cautious feelers from family members. Testing the waters, softening their stance, they were preparing for the next meeting. When the day finally came, I chose neutral ground. Not my house, not the family office. I reserved a private room at an upscale restaurant in Boston. The table was round, not rectangular, no head seat for my father to dominate. I arrived early, making sure everything was in order. When they walked in, the energy was different this time. My father carried himself with a subdued confidence. Uncle? Richard looked resigned rather than angry. Aunt Margaret had dropped her fake charm and wore a carefully neutral expression. Eric seemed uncomfortable, though he kept himself composed. Jonathan looked professional as ever. Two new faces joined them, my mother, who almost never attended business meetings, and Samantha, who had clearly insisted on being there. We exchanged polite greetings, then everyone sat. My father began. Rachel, he said, his voice measured over the past month. We've had time to think carefully about the situation. The family and the business have benefited from your contributions in ways we didn't fully appreciate. Before, we'd like to propose a new arrangement. He nodded to Jonathan, who passed folders around the table. We're proposing a restructuring, my father explained. A new division, Anderson Capital Management. With you as president and CEO. This division would operate with autonomy, your own strategies, your own client relationships, and a separate profit-sharing structure. I opened the folder and skimmed the proposal. The terms were far better than anything I'd ever expected them to offer. A significant ownership stake, decision-making authority, compensation directly tied to performance, and, my father continued, we're changing the structure of the family fund. Going forward, voting rights will be proportional to contributions, not equal across the board. That was a major concession. For years, Aunt Margaret had enjoyed the same voting power as me, despite never contributing or working a day in her life. That system had allowed the laziest voices to weigh as much as mine. Ending it shifted the balance dramatically. What about my existing independent business? I asked. We propose merging it into the new division, Jonathan said. Your patents and intellectual property would remain yours, protected by contract. All client service agreements would remain intact. And succession planning, I pressed. What's to stop this same issue from happening again in the future? My father nodded. The restructuring includes a merit-based succession plan. Leadership positions will be determined by performance and client results, not seniority or family politics. It was a comprehensive plan, addressing almost every concern I'd ever raised. I'll need time to review, I said finally. Of course, my father agreed. We're not expecting an immediate answer. For once, Uncle Richard spoke in a calmer tone. Rachel, I want to acknowledge something. I dismissed your ideas because they weren't how we'd always done things. But the results speak for themselves. I was wrong, and Margaret chimed in too. The family business has to evolve. We can't cling to the past. Eric shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, but even he muttered, I've learned a lot reviewing your strategies. I didn't fully appreciate them before. My mother reached across the table, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. Just a simple gesture, but it meant more than she probably realized. I appreciate your willingness to reconsider, I said carefully. I'll review the proposal with my team and respond within a week. As the meeting ended, Samantha caught my eye and gave me a small, encouraging smile. Whatever I decided, I knew I had at least one family member who truly understood what this moment meant. When I left that meeting at the restaurant, I felt both cautious and curious. For the first time, my family had come to me with real concessions, not empty promises. But I'd been burned too many times to take it at face value. That evening, I sat in my office with the proposal spread out across the table. My small team from Anderson Capital joined me on a video call. We went line by line, analyzing every clause, every detail. The offer was strong, but I wasn't about to accept it blindly. The first thing I noticed was the merger clause. They wanted Anderson Capital, my independent firm, my baby, to be absorbed into the new division. On paper, it looked safe. My patents and intellectual property would remain mine, protected by contract. My client service agreements would remain valid. But I knew enough about contracts to recognize that wording could be twisted later. We need stronger language around intellectual property, I told my team. No loopholes. I want absolute control over my patents, no matter what. The second issue was voting rights in the family fund. While proportional voting was a huge win, the proposal included a vague line about exceptional circumstances allowing for adjustments. That's a red flag, I said. We're cutting that out. If my contribution makes up a third of the fund, I want exactly a third of the votes, no exceptions. Third, I studied the succession plan. Merit-based leadership sounded good, but I wanted it spelled out. Clear metrics, transparent reviews. No wiggle room for favoritism by the time we finished. The proposal was covered in red ink and sticky notes. The next morning, I scheduled a call with Jonathan, the lawyer. I laid out my revisions point by point. Jonathan, you know how this family operates. If we leave even the smallest loophole, they'll exploit it. I want these terms airtight. He sighed. You're right. And to be honest, I don't disagree with any of your edits. I'll redraft and circulate. Over the next week, negotiations went back and forth. My father resisted at first, trying to soften the harsher clauses. Uncle Richard grumbled about overcomplicating things. Aunt Margaret tried to guilt me, saying, Do you really need to put everything in writing? We're family. Yes, I answered flatly every time. That's exactly why it needs to be in writing. Finally, after several rounds, they conceded to every critical point. My patents and intellectual property were locked down as mine. My voting rights were tied directly to my contributions, no exceptions. The succession plan was rewritten with measurable criteria. With those protections in place, I agreed to the deal. Anderson Capital would merge into the new division. Anderson Capital Management. I would serve as president and CEO of the division. reporting, directly to the board, but with full autonomy over strategies and client relationships. Profit sharing would be separate, tied directly to performance. It was everything I had been asking for, only now. It was mine by contract, not by fragile promises. The transition began almost immediately. My independent team was officially folded into the division, now working under the Anderson umbrella, but still reporting directly to me. They were cautious at first, worried about the family politics, but I reassured them, nothing changes about our work. If anything, we'll have more resources now. My clients were notified. Each one had the option to remain with me or stay with the old firm. To my quiet satisfaction, every single one chose to follow me into the new division. Even more surprising, a few of the family firm's clients, those who had personal service clauses with me, exercised their rights to transfer. Within a month, I was managing more than $600 million in assets. My division immediately became the most profitable arm of the business. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Eric tried to challenge me in the first leadership meeting, claiming his experience gave him more insight into certain clients. I let him speak, then calmly pulled out a binder of performance data. My strategies had produced double his returns. The numbers spoke louder than any argument. Uncle Richard tried to undermine me, saying, "All these technical strategies are risky. Clients want stability." I responded by showing client service hard proof that high net worth investors wanted exactly what I was offering. Jonathan, sitting at the table, confirmed the contracts backed me. Richard went silent. Aunt Margaret tried a softer tactic, attempting to align herself with me. "Rachel, I've always supported women in finance. We need to stick together." I smiled politely but didn't respond. She knew, and I knew, that her words meant nothing. Even my father struggled at first. Old habits die hard, more than once. He tried to override my decisions in front of clients. The first time, I let it slide, correcting him gently afterward. The second time, I stopped him mid-sentence, saying firmly, "I've got this." The client nodded, impressed. My father didn't make the mistake a third time. Outside the office, life was changing too. Samantha finally landed a position at a respected architecture firm. She called me one evening, excitement in her voice. "They hired me. I start next month." "That's amazing," I told her. "I knew you could do it." "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "Watching you stand up to them showed me I didn't have to stay trapped." I smiled, proud of her. "You're going to do great things." Her success gave me even more clarity. Standing my ground hadn't just shifted the balance from him, I had given others the courage to break free too. Over the next year, Anderson Capital Management soared. We attracted new clients drawn by our innovative strategies. Returns outpaced every other division, while the rest of the firm celebrated modest gains. My division delivered results that made headlines in industry circles, and slowly, the family dynamics shifted. Uncle Richard still bristled but no longer dismissed me openly. Aunt Margaret kept her snide comments quieter. Eric sulked, but couldn't deny the data. My mother, surprisingly, became one of my quiet supporters. She still clung to the idea of family harmony. But she also began to see that my success strengthened the whole business, and my father-our relationship changed the most. We started spending more time together professionally, not as father and daughter, but as two business leaders. At first, it was awkward. He wasn't used to seeing me as an equal. But over time, respect grew between us. One evening, nearly a year after the group text that started it all, we sat in his office reviewing quarterly results. The firm had never been stronger. He leaned back, thoughtful. "You know, Rachel, I've been thinking about something your grandfather told me when he passed the business down. He said, the best legacy isn't preservation, it's evolution." I didn't understand it then. I think I do now. I looked at him, curious. Evolution is harder than preservation. It means admitting the original form wasn't perfect. He nodded slowly. Exactly. Pride made me resist changes, even when they were for the better, especially when they came from you. He gave me a faint smile. But I see now you weren't trying to tear down the family legacy. You were trying to make it stronger. For the first time, I felt like he truly saw me, not just as his daughter, not just as a bright young woman who talks too much, but as a leader in my own right. Looking back, the journey had been brutal at times. It had required me to risk everything, to walk away from the safety of the family business, to withstand threats and guilt and anger. But it had been worth it, because the lesson I learned wasn't just about finance or strategy. It was about respect. Respect isn't handed out freely. Sometimes you have to claim it. Sometimes you have to stand firm, even if it means shaking the very foundation you've been standing on. And once you do, once you stop begging for approval and start honoring your own value, the entire balance shifts, not just for you but for everyone watching. A full year passed after that group message turned my world upside down. If you had told me then where I'd be now, I don't think I would have believed you. Anderson Capital Management, the Division 1 lead, had become the crown jewel of the family firm. Every quarter, our returns outpaced the other divisions combined. We were attracting clients not just from New England, but from across the country. Our reputation for innovation spread quickly, and suddenly, the risky strategies my family once mocked were the same ones drawing in new business. Clients wanted results, not nostalgia, and I was delivering them. But success didn't erase the tension. Uncle Richard, for instance, never got used to the new power balance. In meetings, he still tried to cut me off or dismiss my points. But now, I had both the data and the authority to shut him down. The numbers are clear, I would say, sliding reports across the table. If you'd like to argue with math, be my guest. Every time, he'd grumble and retreat. Aunt Margaret shifted her strategy. Instead of openly dismissing me, she became overly supportive, almost cloying. Rachel, darling, that's brilliant, she'd gush in meetings, as if overcompensating. Everyone knew it was fake, but I let her play her part. If pretending to admire me made her feel safer, so be it. Eric was the hardest to deal with. He resented me openly, blaming me for his lack of progress. He'd roll his eyes, make sarcastic comments, and occasionally try to claim credit for small wins. But every time he tried, the results spoke for themselves. My division's numbers dwarfed his. Over time, even he had to quiet down, though his bitterness never went away. My mother, surprisingly, became one of my biggest allies. She still hosted dinners and cared about appearances, but she started telling people, Rachel is the one really driving this business now. For a woman who once told me to hide my intelligence, it was progress, and my father, our relationship, was complicated but evolving. He still had moments of slipping into old habits, trying to remind me who was in charge. But more and more, he treated me like a partner. Some nights we stayed late in the office, going over reports together. We debated strategies, challenged each other, even laughed at times. Slowly, he was learning to respect me not just as his daughter but as a leader, outside of work. I was finally building a life for myself. For years, I had sacrificed everything: friends, hobbies, even relationships for the family business. But now, with my independence secure, I allowed myself to live. I started hiking regularly in the White Mountains, rediscovering how good it felt to push my body instead of just my mind. I joined a book club, something I never thought I'd have time for. I even dipped back into dating. Cautiously, it wasn't easy. Many people saw my last name and immediately thought of money or power. But every now and then, I met someone genuine. I wasn't in a rush, I was just learning what it felt like to choose for myself. Samantha became a regular part of my life too. She had left the family firm for good, landing at a small but respected design studio. I invested a little seed money into her dream of starting her own architectural firm, and she was thriving. I finally feel like I'm doing what I was meant to do, she told me one night over dinner. Her success gave me a kind of pride I hadn't felt before. For so long, I'd been alone in the fight. Now, I wasn't just changing my own story, I was opening doors for others in the family too. Of course, not everything was smooth sailing. Running a division with so much success brought new challenges. Competitors tried to poach my clients. A few even tried to lure away members of my team with big offers. But I had built loyalty carefully. My team wasn't just well paid, they were respected, valued, and part of something bigger. No one left. Anderson. Capital management also drew attention from the press. At first, the articles were flattering, praising our results, calling me a rising star in finance. But soon, the headlines shifted to family drama. Reporters loved the story of the daughter who challenged the old guard and forced her way into leadership. I hated the sensational spin, but there wasn't much I could do. The family, of course, wasn't thrilled about the publicity. My father grumbled about airing dirty laundry, but even he couldn't deny the positive attention it brought to the firm. New clients were signing up faster than ever. Then came a new test, a potential merger with a West Coast firm. It was the biggest deal we had considered in decades, joining forces with a San Francisco-based advisory group that specialized in tech startups. They had younger clients, hungry for growth, while we had deep-rooted East Coast wealth. Together, it could create a powerhouse. The board was divided. Uncle Richard and Aunt Margaret were against it, calling it too risky. Eric complained. It would dilute the Anderson brand. My father was on the fence. I spent weeks building the case. I showed projections, synergies, risk analysis. I flew to San Francisco to meet with the other firm's leaders. They were sharp, innovative, and forward-thinking, the kind of partners we needed if we wanted to stay relevant. At the final board meeting, the debate was fierce. Richard slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "We don't need outsiders. We've thrived for 3 generations without them." I stayed calm, letting him vent. When he finally stopped, I slid a report across the table. "Our average client age is 62, I said. "If we don't adapt, we'll age out. This merger brings in a new generation. Without it, we'll stagnate." The room went quiet. Everyone knew I was right. My father leaned back, thinking hard. Finally, he said, "Let's vote." For the first time, the proportional voting structure mattered. My contribution carried weight. When the votes were tallied, the merger passed by, a slim margin, carried by my share. Richard was furious. Aunt Margaret sulked. Eric muttered about betrayal, but it didn't matter. The deal was done. And once again, the gamble paid off. Within 6 months, the merger brought in a flood of new clients, doubling the firm's growth rate. My division had proven itself again, not just with numbers, but with vision. One evening after the merger closed, my father called me into his office. He looked tired but satisfied. "You saved us," he said simply. "I would have let fear win." "You didn't." I studied him, surprised by his honesty. "I didn't save us, Dad. I just pushed us to evolve." He nodded. "And I'm finally learning that's what leadership really is." For the first time, I saw not just respect in his eyes, but trust. Looking back, I realized something important. The fight for respect hadn't just been about me. It was about proving that innovation, intelligence, and vision mattered more than seniority, politics, or tradition. It was about rewriting the rules for everyone who came after me, Samantha, future cousins, maybe even my own children one day. I had gone from being the overlooked daughter to the driving force of the family business. And I had done it not by waiting for permission, but by claiming my worth. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. 2 years after that group text flipped my world upside down, my life looked completely different. I had gone from being dismissed, overlooked, and underestimated to running the most powerful division in the entire firm, Anderson Capital. Management wasn't just a division anymore, it was the engine of the family business. Our performance numbers beat out every competitor in the region. Our strategies weren't just profitable, they were being studied by other firms, copied, written about in industry journals. Sometimes, I'd sit in my office late at night and think back to the girl I used to be, the one who sat quietly in family meetings, waiting for her chance to speak, only to be ignored or waved off. That version of me seemed like a stranger now. But success doesn't erase conflict. If anything, it magnifies it. The merger with the San Francisco firm had brought incredible growth, but it also brought new headaches. Suddenly, we weren't just dealing with wealthy New England families, we were dealing with Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and tech founders who thought in entirely different ways. I loved it. Their energy, their hunger, their willingness to take risks. It reminded me of myself. But my family, they were overwhelmed. In one meeting, Uncle Richard threw up his hands and said, "These people don't care about legacy. They just want to gamble." I corrected him calmly. "They don't gamble. They innovate. There's a difference." He didn't like hearing that, but it was the truth. Aunt Margaret was even worse. She couldn't wrap her head around the idea of billionaires in hoodies. "If they can afford us, why don't they dress properly?" she whispered to me once, horrified after meeting a young client who arrived in sneakers. I didn't even bother explaining. Some people would never understand. Eric, of course, used the new clients as an excuse to blame me for everything. If a client asked a tough question, he'd mutter, "This is what happens when you bring in outsiders." If a deal took longer than expected, he'd say, "See, they're not serious." But when the profits came in, when clients signed multi-million-dollar contracts because of my strategies, he went quiet. My father watched all of this closely. I could see him trying to balance tradition with the reality of change. At first, he resisted, but slowly, he began to admit what he had once refused to see. One night, after a long day of meetings, we sat in his office. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "You were right," he said simply. "About the merger, about the clients, about everything. I should have listened sooner." I gave a small smile. "Better late than never," he chuckled. "Your grandfather would have hated all this Silicon Valley, tech startups, crypto. But he also would have been proud of you." That meant more to me than he realized. But while the business grew stronger, the family fractures grew deeper. Richard became more hostile, resenting how much control I now had. Margaret kept up her fake charm, but started aligning herself more with whoever seemed most powerful in the moment. And Eric, he spiraled. His division lagged behind badly, and no matter how hard he tried to spin it, clients weren't impressed. One afternoon, I overheard him arguing with my father in the hallway. "You're letting her take over everything," Eric snapped. "She's destroying the Anderson legacy." "No," my father said firmly. "She's saving it." The look on Eric's face when I walked by was pure hatred. Outside of work, though, I was thriving. For the first time, I had balance. I kept hiking, joined a cooking class, even started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. I had a circle of friends outside the family, people who didn't care about my last name or the size of my bank account, and I was finally allowing myself to date seriously. His name was Daniel, a lawyer I met through a mutual friend. He was grounded, thoughtful, funny, in a quiet way. Most importantly, he wasn't intimidated by me. On our third date, when I told him about my role at the firm, he just smiled and said, "So you're basically the brains of the operation." Something like that. I laughed with him. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I could just be Rachel. It wasn't perfect, we both had demanding careers, and my family drama sometimes spilled over. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had space for love in my life. Samantha, meanwhile, was flying high. Her design studio was thriving, and she was winning small but prestigious projects across Boston. Sometimes we'd sit together in a cafe, laptops open, working side by side. She'd be sketching floor plans, I'd be reviewing portfolios. It felt like the future of the two of us building our own empires, on our own terms. She told me once, "I think about how different life would have been if you hadn't stood up that day. I'd probably still be stuck in marketing, miserable." "Maybe," I said. "But you were strong enough to break out eventually. I just gave you a push." She smiled. "Still, I'll always remember it." But not everyone remembered that moment kindly. About 2.5 years in, Eric tried to launch a coup. That's really the only word for it. He called a private meeting of the board, trying to argue that I was destabilizing the firm with my aggressive strategies. He painted me as reckless, a risk to the family's future. What he didn't expect was that I had allies now. Jonathan, the lawyer, shut him down with legal precision. Her division is contractually autonomous, and her strategies have generated the majority of profits for the last 8 quarters. Calling that destabilizing is inaccurate. My father backed me too. "Eric, you're lashing out because your numbers don't match hers. That's not Rachel's fault. That's yours." The board voted, and Eric's proposal was rejected unanimously. When I heard about it afterward, I wasn't even angry. Just tired. Later that night, Daniel asked me, "Why do you still do it? Why not walk away and run your own firm completely?" I thought about it for a long time. Because this isn't just about me. It's about changing the system from the inside. If I walk away, nothing changes. If I stay, they're forced to evolve. He nodded slowly. That's the kind of fight only someone like you could take on. The following year brought more growth, more clients, more change. My division crossed the $1 billion mark in managed assets. We were no longer just a success story. We were a force in the financial world. The press wrote profiles about me, calling me the woman who redefined a dynasty. Industry conferences invited me to speak. Young women in finance started reaching out, saying, "You've inspired me to push for more." I hadn't set out to be a role model, but I realized I had become one, and that, more than the money or the power, was what made me proud, because I wasn't just rewriting my own story, I was helping others believe they could rewrite theirs. To dot by the 3rd year of running Anderson Capital Management, I thought I had seen it all. Family politics, client drama, boardroom battleside, survived every storm so far. But I was wrong. The biggest tests were still ahead of me. It started with Eric. After his failed attempt to push me out, he became desperate. His division was shrinking fast, clients leaving in droves, and his resentment toward me grew darker. I heard whispers from staff that he was holding secret meetings, making calls late at night, even meeting with competitors. At first, I brushed it off. Eric had always been bitter. Why waste energy on him? But one evening, Jonathan called me. "Rachel, I need to tell you something," he said carefully. "Eric's been talking with a rival firm. He's offering to bring clients with him if they back him in starting a new company." I sat in silence for a moment, my chest tightening. "He's planning to defect." "Yes, and he's trying to convince others to go with him." I leaned back in my chair, anger simmering. "After everything we've built, he's going to stab us in the back." Jonathan's voice was calm, but serious. "He's your cousin, Rachel, but he's also dangerous now. You need to be ready." I didn't confront Eric right away. Instead, I prepared. I met with my team, secured client contracts, and made sure every legal protection was airtight. I strengthened loyalty inside my division, reminding my staff that our strength was in unity. Then, at the next board meeting, I addressed it head on. "Eric," I said, my voice steady, "I know you've been talking with our competitors." The room went still. Richard glanced at Eric in shock. Margaret tried to pretend she didn't hear. My father narrowed his eyes. Eric flushed red. "That's a lie." Jonathan cleared his throat. "It isn't. I've confirmed it." Eric's chair scraped loudly against the floor as he stood. You're trying to paint me as the villain while you take everything. You've ruined this family business with your reckless ideas. I met his glare calmly. No, Eric, I saved it. You're the one tearing it apart because you can't stand being outperformed. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was quiet but firm. Eric, you're suspended from the board, effective immediately. We'll review your position after legal review. Eric stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. That was the last time I saw him in the family office. But Eric wasn't done. Within months, he launched his own firm. He poached 2 junior staff members and tried to lure clients away. At first, I worried it would work. But most clients stayed loyal, and the few who left quickly returned after his returns collapsed. Still, the betrayal cut deep. He wasn't just a rival, he was family. One night, I sat at my kitchen table with Daniel, tears in my eyes. I don't understand how he could do this, I admitted. We grew up together. We were supposed to carry this business into the future together. Daniel squeezed my hand gently. Sometimes, the people closest to us can't handle our success. It makes them face their own failures. That's not on you, Rachel. That's on him. His words didn't erase the hurt, but they helped me breathe. Meanwhile, the outside world brought challenges to dot the economy hit a downturn, rattling markets everywhere. Clients panicked, calling daily, demanding reassurance. My strategies were designed for resilience, but the pressure was intense. Every decision felt like walking a tightrope. On top of that, regulators started scrutinizing the industry more closely. They requested records, conducted audits, grilled us on compliance. I had nothing to hide, but the process was exhausting. For weeks, I barely slept. My days blurred into nights filled with spreadsheets, phone calls, and endless meetings. Daniel tried to support me cooking dinners, reminding me to rest, but I could see the toll it was taking on our relationship. One night, he finally said what I had been dreading. Rachel, I love you, but I feel like I'm always competing with your work, and I'm losing. The words hit me like a punch. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, I knew he was right. We sat in silence, both knowing what was coming. A week later, we broke up. It wasn't dramatic, just sad. Another reminder of how much my career had cost me. But in the middle of all the chaos, something unexpected happened. Samantha's design studio landed a massive contract to design a new cultural center in Boston. It was her dream project, the kind of opportunity architects wait their whole lives for. She called me late at night, her voice buzzing with excitement. Rachel, they picked my design. Out of 50 competitors, I smiled through my exhaustion. That's incredible, Sam. I'm so proud of you. Her success reminded me that life wasn't only about the family business. It was about carving out space for ourselves, building legacies that mattered to us. And in that moment, I promised myself something. No matter how hard things got, I wouldn't let this business consume me completely. The next board meeting brought a new storm. Richard, emboldened by Eric's absence, tried to rally the others against me. He argued that my division had too much influence and proposed capping its profits to keep the firm balanced. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want to punish success? I asked flatly. Richard puffed up his chest. It's about fairness. I leaned forward. Fairness is every division earning its keep. If yours can't, that's not my fault. My father backed me. Rachel's division is the reason we're thriving. We're not cutting her down to make you feel better. The vote went in my favor, but the message was clear. No matter how much I achieved, there would always be someone trying to pull me back down. Late one night, sitting alone in my office, I thought about everything I had been through, the fights, the betrayals, the sacrifices. Was it worth it? The answer, surprisingly, came easily. Yes, because even with the pain, even with the battles, I had built something real. Something that wasn't just about money or power, but about respect. and respect, once earned, can't be taken away. Eric's departure left a scar on the family. Even though most clients stayed with us and his new firm fizzled quickly, the wound was deeper than money. It was about loyalty, about trust at family gatherings. His absence was a shadow. My mother avoided mentioning his name. Margaret acted like nothing had happened, and Richard looked at me with open resentment, as if I had personally driven Eric out. The truth was, Eric had made his own choices. But in families like ours, people love to rewrite history. To them, I wasn't the cousin who built the firm's most successful division. I was the cousin who pushed Eric away. I carried that weight quietly, but I refused to let it stop me. Meanwhile, outside competitors were circling like sharks. Anderson Capital Management had made too much noise in the industry. Bigger firms saw us as a threat, and they weren't subtle. About it one morning, I walked into my office to find an email forwarded by my assistant. A rival firm had launched an ad campaign targeting my division specifically. They compared our strategies to theirs, claiming we were reckless and unsustainable. At first, I was furious. Then, I smiled. You don't waste money attacking someone unless you're scared of them. I called my team into the conference room. They're coming after us, I said, showing them the ads. So what do we do? Hit back harder, one analyst said. No, I replied. We don't waste time fighting their narrative. We show results. The best revenge is outperforming them so badly they can't ignore it. So that's what we did. We doubled down on client service, sharpened our strategies, and within 6 months, our returns left that rival firm in the dust. Clients saw the difference, and more of them came knocking. The ads disappeared quietly soon after, but the pressure kept building. The bigger we grew, the more scrutiny we attracted. Regulators visited again, digging through records, asking endless questions. I worked long nights, often falling asleep at my desk. One evening, my father found me still at the office, my head resting on a stack of reports. He stood in the doorway, watching me for a long moment before saying softly, "You remind me of myself when I was your age." I looked up, tired but curious. "And did it make you happy?" He hesitated. "It made me powerful. It made me respected, but happiness. I don't know if I thought much about that." His honesty startled me. "Don't lose yourself in this," he added. "The business will always take everything you give it. You have to decide how much you're willing to give." The word stuck with me. Around the same time, Samantha hit a new milestone. Her design for the cultural center broke ground, and newspapers were calling her one of Boston's rising stars. I attended the ceremony, standing in the crowd while she gave her speech. Watching her on stage, confident and radiant, I felt something stir inside me. She had found her passion and built it on her own terms. I had built something too, but was it mine? Or was I still trapped inside the family shadow, even at the top? That night, over wine at her apartment, I asked her, "Do you ever wonder if we're just repeating the cycle? Different paths, same weight on our shoulders." She shook her head firmly. "No, because the difference is, we chose this. You chose to fight for respect. I chose to design. That makes it ours, not theirs." Her words were simple, but they cut through the fog in my head. Personally, though, I was still unsettled. After Daniel and I split, I threw myself into work, again, telling myself I didn't have time for love. But there were nights when the silence of my apartment felt too heavy, when I wished for someone to share the victories and the burdens with. I went on dates here and there, but nothing serious. Every time, the same problems surfaced. They saw the last name, the money, the power, and either chased it or feared it. Very few saw me. It made me wonder if balance was even possible for someone like me. Could I have both the career I built and the personal life I craved? Or would I always have to choose? Then came another test, a client crisis. One of our biggest accounts of family trust, worth nearly $200 million, was rocked by scandal. Their patriarch had been arrested for fraud, and the press swarmed like vultures. Reporters dragged our firm's name into the headlines just because we managed the money. For days, my phone didn't stop ringing. Clients wanted reassurance, reporters wanted statements, regulators wanted details. My team looked to me for direction. So I stood firm. We're not responsible for their actions, I told my staff. Our job is to manage the money ethically and transparently. That's what we've done. That's what we'll keep doing. We handled it with precision, moving assets legally, protecting innocent family members, and cooperating fully with investigators. Within weeks, the headline shifted. Instead of blaming us, the press praised our handling of the crisis. It was one of the hardest months of my career, but also one of the most rewarding. Because in that storm, I realized something. I wasn't just proving myself to my family anymore. I was proving myself to the world. After the dust settled, I took a weekend off for a rare luxury. I drove to a quiet cabin in Vermont. No phone, no laptop, just me in the silence. For 2 days, I hiked, read books, cooked simple meals, and stared at the stars. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized how far I had come. 3 years earlier, I had been the ignored daughter, dismissed by a group text. Now, I was the one steering the ship, the one clients trusted, the one family members feared and respected in equal measure. But more than that, I had found my voice. I wasn't just fighting for a seat at the table anymore. I was the table, and for the first time, I started to think seriously about what came next. Not just for the business, but for me. The 4th year after that group message began quietly, but it didn't stay that way. My father, the man who had always been larger than life, started showing signs of slowing down. At first it was small things, forgetting a detail in a meeting, cutting out early on a Friday, skipping the gym. But soon it became harder to ignore. One afternoon, he fainted in his office. The staff rushed him to the hospital, and the doctors said it was exhaustion mixed with heart trouble. He recovered quickly, but it was a wake-up call for everyone. For the first time, the family had to face the question no one wanted to ask: what happens when he steps down? The air inside the firm grew heavy. Meetings took on a different tone. Richard circled like a vulture, pushing his agenda. Margaret whispered about keeping things traditional, and me sat quietly, letting them talk. But I knew where this was heading. Sooner or later, succession would be on the table. At the next board meeting, the topic could no longer be avoided. Richard spoke first. We need to plan for the future. This firm was built by strong, steady leadership. It should stay that way. Everyone knew what he meant. He wanted the job. Margaret chimed in, her voice syrupy. Richard does have experience. Perhaps he'd be a natural choice. I looked across the table, feeling my blood heat. Experience doesn't mean success. Results do. And my division has been carrying this firm for years. Richard slammed his fist down. You think a few good years make you ready to run everything? This business isn't just number 6 heritage. I leaned forward, my voice calm but sharp. Heritage doesn't pay the bills. Clients don't stay because of a last name. They stay because of performance. And I've proven I can deliver. The room went silent. For once, even my father didn't interrupt. He just watched, eyes narrowed, as if weighing us both. Later that week, he called me into his office. He looked tired but focused. Rachel, he said. Richard's hungry for power. Margaret will back whoever seems strongest. The board will eventually ask me to name a successor. I need to know, do you want it? The question hit me like a wave. I had fought so hard for respect, for my place, for my division, but leading the entire firm, that was another level. I took a deep breath. I don't just want it for the title, Dad. If I do it, it has to mean real change. No more clinging to the past. No more politics. I want to take this firm into the future. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That's exactly the answer I was hoping for. But Richard didn't give up easily. He started campaigning quietly, calling board members, hosting dinners, promising favors. Margaret whispered in social circles that I was too emotional to lead. Eric, from outside, spread rumors that I was tearing the family apart. It was exhausting. But instead of fighting back with gossip, I fought with results. Every quarter, my division's numbers spoke louder than their whispers. Clients praised me openly. Industry articles called me the visionary leader of the Anderson firm. And slowly, the tide shifted. At home, my relationship with my father deepened. His health scare had softened him, made him more reflective. We spent evenings talking not just about business, but about life. One night, he admitted, "When you were younger, I didn't know how to handle you. You were too smart, too strong-willed. I thought if I kept you quiet, you'd eventually fall in line. But I see now I was wrong." Hearing him say that nearly broke me. For years, I had begged for his approval, his recognition. Now, finally, it was here. "You weren't wrong about me being strong-willed," I teased lightly. He chuckled. "No, I wasn't. And thank God for it." Meanwhile, Samantha's cultural center was nearing completion. She invited me to walk through the construction site one chilly morning. The steel beams rose high above us, sunlight pouring through gaps in the walls. "This is my legacy," she whispered, her eyes shining. "When this is done, it'll stand for decades." I looked around, imagining the finished space filled with art, music, laughter. "It's beautiful," I said. "You're building something that will outlive us." Her words lingered in my mind. What was my legacy going to be? Would it just be numbers on spreadsheets, profits in accounts, or something more? That question weighed on me when, months later, the board formally brought up succession. My father's health was stable but fragile, and they wanted clarity. Richard made his pitch first. He spoke about tradition, stability, and family honor. He talked about his decades of service, about keeping things the way they were meant to be. Then it was my turn. I stood and spoke from the heart. This firm can't survive by looking backward. Clients are changing, markets are changing, the world is changing. If we cling to the past, we'll become irrelevant. But if we embrace innovation, if we lead with vision, we can shape the future. I didn't wave charts or numbers. This time, I just spoke with conviction, letting them hear the truth in my voice. When I sat down, the room was quiet. Even Richard had no rebuttal. Afterward, my father pulled me aside. "No matter what happens with the board, know this: you've already proven yourself, to me, to the clients, to the world. That can't be taken away." I nodded, my throat tight. "But I want to prove it to the family too." He gave a small smile. "Sometimes families never admit the truth, but that doesn't make it any less true." That night, lying awake in my apartment, I thought about everything: my father's words, Samantha's legacy, my own journey. For so long, my fight had been about respect, about carving out space in a family that tried to shut me out. But now, it wasn't just about survival. It was about deciding what kind of mark I wanted to leave. And I realized something. Leadership isn't just about winning power. It's about using it to build something that lasts. The question was I ready to take that step? The board vote was set for a Monday morning. That entire weekend, I barely slept. I walked the city streets, replaying every moment that had brought me here: the group message that cut me out, the long nights building my division, the betrayals, the victories, the quiet conversations with my father, the tears with Samantha, the heartbreak with Daniel. It all came down to this. Asterisk, asterisk, the boardroom was packed that morning. My father sat at the head of the table, pale but steady. Richard sat stiffly across from me, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. Margaret fluttered beside him, whispering encouragement like a cheerleader at a doomed game. The vote was called. Each member cast their ballot. One by one, the results were tallied. And when the final count was read aloud, my heart stopped. I had won by a narrow but undeniable margin. I was named the successor, the next head of the firm. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Richard slammed his hand on the table and stormed out. Margaret followed quickly behind him. My father looked at me, pride shining through his tired eyes. It's yours now, Rachel. Make it better than I ever could. I wanted to cry, but I held myself tall. I will. Taking over wasn't easy. The weight of responsibility was enormous. Overnight, every decision, every client, every deal, every risk rested on my shoulders. There were missteps, of course. I made mistakes, stumbled, doubted myself. But every time, I remembered how far I had come. I remembered that scared young woman reading a group message that told her to step away, and how she refused to let that be her ending. That memory gave me strength. The family didn't magically transform. Richard kept his distance, sulking in silence. Margaret pretended to be supportive when cameras were around, but I knew better. Eric's small firm limped along, irrelevant but still bitter toward me. But something had changed. They couldn't dismiss me anymore. They couldn't cut me out or belittle me or act like my voice didn't matter, because I wasn't just part of the family. Business side was the family business now. And that truth settled into every corner of the boardroom. Outside of work, my life also shifted. I didn't rush back into dating. Instead, I focused on myself, my friendships, my passions, my peace. I hiked more, painted more, spent long afternoons with Samantha, who was now preparing for the opening of her cultural center. The night of the grand opening, I stood in the audience as she walked onto the stage. The building was breathtaking glass and steel, catching the evening light, art installations glowing inside. When the crowd erupted into applause, I clapped until my hands ached. After her speech, she found me in the crowd and hugged me tightly. "We did it, Rachel," she whispered. "We built our own legacies." And she was right. Hers stood in brick and glass. Mine in contracts and leadership, both equally real. A few months into my new role, I gathered my entire staff for a meeting. Standing at the front of the room, looking at all the faces who had trusted me, followed me, believed in me, I spoke from my heart. "This firm has been through a lot," I began. "But we're not just surviving, we're thriving. And that's because of all of you. Together, we're building something that will last for generations." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, I truly felt like a leader, not because of my title, but because of the people who stood with me at home. My father's health continued to decline, but his spirit remained strong. One evening, as we sat together in his study, he placed a hand on mine. "You've done what I couldn't," he said softly. "You changed the way this family sees leadership. You made them face the truth, and I am proud of you, more than you'll ever know." Tears filled my eyes. "Thank you, Dad. That means everything." He smiled faintly. "Just promise me one thing. Anything. Don't let the business become your whole life. Leave room for love, for joy, for yourself," I promised. And I meant it. Years later, when people looked back on that time, they didn't remember the petty fights, the betrayals, the bitterness. They remembered the turning point when the Anderson firm stopped clinging to the past and stepped boldly into the future. And at the center of that turning point was me, not the daughter who was told to step aside, not the cousin who was dismissed, not the young woman forced to beg for respect, but the leader who claimed her place, built her legacy, and proved that strength, vision, and determination mattered more than tradition or fear. Standing in my office, one evening, looking out over the city skyline, I thought about everything that had brought me there. The message that once broke me had become the fire that rebuilt me, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning, because the story of my life wasn't about being cut out. It was about stepping in stronger, wiser, and ready to lead.